Welcome to the recorded version of Helping Seniors with Loss of Independence, part of the Family Caregiver Support webinar series brought to you by the American Society on Aging and a generous sponsorship from Home Instead Senior Care.
Okay, our presenter today is going to be Molly Carpenter. Author, speaker, trainer, and family caregiver, Molly Carpenter brings years of personal and professional senior care experience and training to families dealing with dementia care. In her current role, Molly works with a team responsible for ensuring that Home Instead Senior Care Network's 60,000 caregivers worldwide have the resources necessary to effectively provide quality care in the home and understand the importance of their work enhancing the lives of those they serve. Molly holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Family Science with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and also a master's degree in education with a gerontology specialization from the University of Nebraska-Omaha. And with that, I would like to welcome our presenter for today, Molly Carpenter. Thank you again for being here today, Molly. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks everyone for joining today's webinar. I'm real excited you're all here again today as our last one of 2015. I hope you're enjoying this holiday season so far. I can't believe I just said that Christmas is so close, but there we are. And I'm glad you're taking some time out of the hustle of the season to join us today for this webinar. We're going to start talking today the topic of helping seniors with loss of independence. And this is always a hard topic for me to cover, and I think it's probably a hard topic for all of you to hear about. I think it's also one of those topics that we deal with every single day in our jobs as healthcare professionals working with aging adults. This is sensitive, but it's very, very important. You know, coping with the changes of aging, they can be tough for all of us, and even though it's gradual and it starts slow, but losing independence might be the toughest change to cope with. And I want you to think about this for a minute before we get into it. It's sort of ingrained in us as children, you know, this goal when we're kids to become independent, be our own person, take full control of our life. And we spend so many years, you know, getting that control, and then when we have it, we spend most of our years in control of everything that we do. And when you think about it, that's being in control of our decisions in our life. That's the only thing we pretty much can control in this world. But when we're faced with losing this independence, we're basically losing the control over our life. We're giving the reins over to someone else to manage because we aren't capable. So the daily decisions of what you had for breakfast, what you put on today, what route you took to the office, you know, all of those things, that isn't our decision to make anymore. Somebody could be making those for us. And I just want you to pause and think about what that would mean to you, or, you know, what that can mean to a senior or somebody that you're caring for or somebody that you've interacted with. It's really heart-wrenching when you think about it. And I know we don't want to think about it, but again, we all work in this industry where we're serving older adults, and this is what we, you know, face because this is what they're coping with daily. Let's, on the next slide, look at why it is so important in being independent. And I think this is, again, pretty obvious information, but it's worth repeating and saying that nearly 90% of aging adults would prefer that they stay at home when they get older. And I bring that up, you know, we talk about that now because that's what being independent is about. That's one of the biggest decisions that a senior may have to face. And when you can stay at home where you have all those good feelings, you feel the safety and the love and the warmth and the family, all of those things where we want to be, where you're most comfortable, that's one of the biggest decisions that a person can make in the future as they age. So we know 90% want to stay there. There's lots of reasons that seniors fear leaving home, and that is losing the independence. They will know when they leave home they may have to rely on others to make decisions or for care, and they don't want to be a burden. And they want to maintain their current lifestyle and maintain that control that we just talked about. And so much, sometimes seniors, what they'll do is deny their true care needs so that they can stay at home even longer. That's why it's really important we talk about this today so that we can help our family caregivers really look for signs and understand what is happening, because ignoring the warning signs is going to lead to the dependence that the senior is probably trying to avoid in the first place. So let's look at objectives on the next slide. And just to kind of frame up this conversation today, we are going to discuss some easily identifiable signs that you can suggest that the family caregivers look for. And they kind of fall into three categories. There's physical symptoms as well as mental or emotional symptoms or changes. There's loss of attention signals, and then there's environmental cues. So that's kind of how we group into the kind of signs that people and family caregivers can look for. And we're going to go over those a lot today. And we're going to also discuss ways that caregivers can take action to ensure that their senior loved one has the assistance they need to live safely and comfortably at home or wherever that may be. Now, I want to start off with why do we have a whole webinar on this topic today? Why is getting older so hard? Let's look on the next slide. And I love this quote. I think I've heard this about 20 years ago or so in my early days. Growing old is not for sissies. I used to have a poster in my office, and it was a senior gentleman. You may have all seen this image. I should have put it on the slide here, but it's a senior gentleman with boxing gloves on, and he's ripped. He has great biceps and six-pack abs, and basically it says, growing old is not for sissies, which is a famous Betty Davis quote. And boy, she was right. And when we look at seniors, we might have to think, we can sometimes think, wow, they don't have a care in the world. They've raised their children, they've completed their education, they're probably retired and had a great career. They're no longer, slaves to that daily grind of the work week. They're free to go out, enjoy life, travel, enjoy their interests and hobbies. But we all know, we've seen the side where aging, it comes with lots of stressors. And I want to start thinking about this or looking at this today from an emotional or standpoint and really, again, put ourselves in their shoes. I think it's hard to do that, but it's important to really understand the message. And people might be thinking, what if I lose my independence and need to rely on others? That is a thought that crosses a lot of seniors' minds. People fear that being weak and needy. Again, we talked about we're raised to be independent. It's also noble to be strong and independent, and people celebrate independence and the control that we have. So this concept goes against our grain, losing our independence. Seniors may also be asking, will my life lose its meaning if I'm no longer useful, or if I have to depend on somebody else, or I lose this independence? People always want to feel validated, and they want to feel useful, and they want to still contribute to the world and their life and their communities. And so, again, we have to challenge our family caregivers to put themselves in the shoes of their senior or their aging loved one and really try to have that empathy and understanding of what is happening to their loved one. So I want to talk about when you think about all of these things, losing independence, losing abilities, physical and mental abilities, having to rely on others, how do seniors usually react to this kind of loss or life changes, or what do we anticipate their reactions be? Let's look at some of those on the next slide. I don't think these are going to come to any surprise to all of you. I know in just preparing for this webinar, fear is a word that came to my mind. I pictured myself, and I do have a friend with a disability with some blindness and some eyesight issues, and kind of tried to put myself in her shoes on occasion. And again, fear is the word that comes. Frightened about vulnerability and wondering how I would manage if I couldn't see, or again, putting it in the context of today, if when a senior realizes or is losing some of those abilities, fear might be a common emotion that they're feeling or a reaction to this loss. They might be vulnerable, and they're just, worried about how they're going to manage in the future and manage on their own. And they may begin, it can go a couple ways. They might begin to expect close friends and families to be always available for them, or which can be hard for that family caregiver to manage. Or they may go the opposite way and start distancing themselves from neighbors and friends and some family because they don't want to be a burden, so to speak. Anger is another common reaction. I know that you've all probably witnessed this. You've witnessed a moment of frustration that a senior has felt where they realize or they have a moment where something they used to do, they can't quite do it the way they used to, or they can't do it at all anymore, and they can no longer manage. I know we've seen this a time or two in our careers. I've seen it several times. Anger and being angry is a common reaction to these losses and these feelings. And then guilt. Some seniors could feel some guilt and refuse the needed help from families and friends because, again, they don't want to be that burden. And just guilt because they can't do what they used to do, feeling really bad about not being able to do what they used to do. And then there's a reaction of confusion. Some people do feel confused about needing help, meaning they might be confused of, oh, I don't really need help, I'm fine. Like they don't understand the changes that's happened and that they should get help. Or they actually can do lots of, we've had this before where we have seniors that can do lots of things but still want help. So there's some confusion around when to need help, when to react to the loss, when to really try to really, I'm having a hard time articulating, really helping people when somebody's confused about this loss and this loss of independence, it's a lot of where do I turn, what do I do, what do I need? And that's where we all come in our daily lives, in our daily jobs, that we can help these people figure that out a little bit more. So aging brings about a lot of these emotions and reactions in people, and that's why it's hard because it's different for everyone. But again, when we try to put ourselves in the senior's shoes or look at it from their perspective, we can gain a little bit of understanding to the situation. Now, there's some things that a family caregiver can say or do to help a loved one through these emotions, and I want to talk about that on the next slide. I think this is important because a lot of times we don't know what to say and we don't know what to tell families to say, and nobody really knows how to react or nobody knows what, it's hard to empathize when we don't really know what it's like. So this is hard to help somebody through these changes. But families can start by reminding their loved one that it's normal to feel this way. It's normal to respond or have this response to the situation by having a lot of those emotions. And I think it's okay to say that sometimes realizing that a lot of people are in their shoes or in the same boat kind of helps people feel a little bit better occasionally. Even I've empathized, I recall when my grandmother was still alive, when she would complain about something that was an aging type of a symptom, I would say, yeah, tell me about it, Graham. I just had to get reading glasses for the first time, and I just can't get used to it. And I kind of told her about my struggles with reading glasses, and she said, yeah, I remember that. That was a tough one. So just kind of being able to relate to the senior and to the aging loved one can be a great response as well. And another positive or another way to approach this or a good response is to really, for families to encourage their loved one to take each day and each change one by one. Remind them that it's typical to think far in the future, but we really should just live in the moment and live where we're at for now. We can all be negative, and so we need to keep encouraging that positive attitude. It can go a really long way. Think about the positive things that come along with aging. I know that's sometimes people don't understand that there are some positives, but there are, and I know you've all can witness that and see that too. But that's a whole new concept for the world to grasp, let me tell you. But seniors have this amazing wisdom, and they have all this experience, and they have so many positive memories. So let's keep tapping into those things as a response to some of these changes that aren't so positive. Another good tip to share with families is to encourage the senior not to compare how things used to be when it comes to abilities. Hardest thing to do. And I can appreciate that. Even thinking about what I used to be able to do in sports versus what I can do now being 40. So we have all experienced it, but it's really helpful to not sort of relish in the past. And I always think about this quote that I put on the slide, and because I never want to have regrets about my past or think negatively about my past, but this quote is about the reason people find it so hard to be happy is that they always see the past as better than it was, the present worse than it is, and the future less resolved than it will be. And I literally think about that quote on a very regular basis, because we, have these visions that we were these, star athletes when we were in high school and college, when really we probably weren't as good as in our mind that we were. So I just try to use that quote a lot. I never want to have regrets, so I always am reminding myself about this quote, but it can apply to seniors as well. The present isn't as worse as we make it out to be. I just think we think so fondly of our past, which is a good thing, but when we compare it to where we are now, it's never as good. And so if we can kind of retool our minds to find the positive in every phase or situation of our life, it's going to be really, really helpful for not only all of us, but for these family caregivers as well. Okay, so let's start looking at some of the signs of aging, or some of the signs of losing independence. And we're going to start with physical signs on the next slide. We need to help our families understand these signs so they can, prompt action and look for any reason that they might need to get involved a little bit more and do some extra things for their aging loved one. So some of the signs, there's a lot of signs that families can recognize right away. And we want them to be able to recognize as quickly as possible, because, as we said in the beginning, or as I said in the beginning, if we don't catch these signs early enough, it could lead to some sort of a terrible accident, or an accident that causes the person to lose some independence even more. So it's really helpful to look at these signs. So a couple of them, a big one to me is loss of energy. Does their parent or senior loved one feel tired all the time? When they call the person on the phone, are they waking him or her up from a nap? You know how you can kind of tell somebody was dozing off or sleeping when you call them. That extra tiredness, the fatigue, loss of energy, those are just some of the physical signs that a daughter or son or a neighbor might notice with their aging parents. They may be struggling, and they may need some extra attention. Also, we've got to look at balance issues and changes in gait. That's another really big physical sign. They really should, a senior family caregiver should really take note if their aging loved one is having difficulty getting up from a chair, or unsteady when they're walking a little bit, or maybe they're just, you can tell their balance is off even when they're just standing up. They're kind of shifting their weight back and forth, and they're kind of getting a little wobbly. If the gait has changed, or if they're using items to balance themselves as they walk around the room, that's a really big sign. The caregiver should really pay attention to some of those things. Even taking a closer look into the bathroom is a common place where people might grab a towel bar or a shower curtain or a windowsill or something to try to balance themselves. That can be a sign that, my aging loved one's a little bit unsteady. And so, again, important to notice those things. Some other physical symptoms of an underlying health issue are a loss of appetite or weight loss. Is the caregiver hearing words like, "I'm not hungry," more often? Or my grandma's was, "I can't eat all of that," or "I don't want to eat all of that." Those are some of the common phrases. But the caregiver should check over the grocery list. This is where we probably should be checking refrigerators and cabinets for junk food items or easier to prepare items that might be lacking nutritional value. That's important. Because really, maybe that could just be the issue, that they're just not getting the enough nutritional vitamins they need out of their food, which can happen if you're trying to find foods that are easier to prepare. Sometimes what's easy is there's tons of preservatives and not the nutritional value. So checking that refrigerator, looking for any signs of poor nutrition is a big sign for a family to notice that might trigger some needing more help in the future. And then we always have to think about hearing loss or vision problems. Our caregivers noticing mom or dad asking them to repeat the question over and over or asking to speak louder. Is the TV volume really loud? That was my big clue with my grandmother. Whenever I called her, I had to wait a minute for her to turn the TV down. It was so loud before starting our conversation. And with vision, I noticed that she would start using her magnifying glass more often to do her word searches. So these were signs that things were changing, and it was really important that we were aware of these signs so that we can keep a closer eye on the aging process and any changes that were happening. She passed away at age 98. At 96, she had a cataract surgery still. So we noticed as she used her magnifying glass more often that it was probably time to go in for an eye appointment and really get the eyes checked again. So those signs can be very helpful for families. All right, let's talk about emotional symptoms on the next slide. We're going to go back to the fatigue. I know that's not really a emotional symptom, so to speak, but I put it up there because, when you're not feeling good or you're feeling blue or maybe you're bored, you might sleep a little bit more. And you might be looking for those nap opportunities. So it's just, I guess, maybe persistent fatigue, but a change in the napping schedule, so to speak, or just more grogginess on a regular basis could be a sign that things aren't going well emotionally, that things are changing perhaps with the senior. The other thing is looking at socializing and social activities. Families need to understand, obviously they know their loved one's routine pretty well. So are they maintaining that routine? Are they going to church, for example? Are they meeting their friends on a regular basis? Are they still doing their card bridge club, for example, that they've done their whole life? Those are some really good signs. Missing it once in a while is one thing, but missing it on a regular basis is a sign that families should be paying attention to. If the person has stopped socializing, it could be a signal of depression. It could be a signal of underlying a physical health issue that either they are in pain or they're afraid to fall, or maybe they're embarrassed. So that all of those things very important to understand. And, again, I use my example with my grandmother, which she missed a few, maybe it was a couple times a month she missed church for a period of time there for a quarter. And after the third time, we really started to understand, asking her questions of what is going on, why aren't you going to Mass? And it turned out that the person who took her to church was having health problems, but my grandmother didn't want to tell us that because she didn't want to be a burden. So that was, again, something we picked up on, asked her more questions, figured it out, and then made arrangements for her to get another ride. Now, eventually she stopped going to because of health issues. Of course, that's going to happen. But that was another 2 years down the road after this conversation about her friend. So, again, if savvy caregivers, I'm not saying we were a savvy group, believe me, but this is one of the things we picked up on. But savvy caregivers, they can, if they are looking for these signs, we can find some solutions and really keep the person active in their social engagement and maintain their independence, which, again, is the goal. Now, there are times when it can be a drastic mood change, and that can be a pretty obvious sign to a caregiver. When you think about drastic, though, we've got to think about going from happy to sad in seconds, or really happy and crying, or are they really grumpy and not snapping out of it anytime like a day goes on. So we can't just brush those to the side. And if they stretch over days or weeks, that's when we really need to have our family caregivers call, talk to a doctor, give them in for an appointment, so on and so forth. Also, checking in with neighbors and friends. We had to do that a few times with my grandmother. Her best friend came over every morning for coffee and cinnamon rolls. And when she would go through those periods, we would call her best friend and say, how was she with you? What is her mood? What is she saying? We're just worried about her. So, again, important for families to understand these things. Okay, now let's look on the next slide at the loss of attention signals and maybe some environmental clues for family caregivers as well. And when I say loss of attention, it means, to me that's a little bit confusing title. I should change it to maybe something of the person isn't paying attention as they used to, or they're not paying attention to the details that they used to. So we got to start with appearance, and some of those details could be, are their clothes wrinkled? Are there spots on their clothes? A lot of times seniors can't see those spots. So we can tell, though, as healthcare professionals or as family caregivers, that something that has spots, probably needs to get washed. And, that could be a signal of a lot of things. Maybe they're struggling doing the laundry. Maybe it's too hard to do the laundry anymore. Or maybe, again, the eyesight thing. Or it could be some memory loss if they're not remembering to change clothes. So, again, you've got to think about when we see these signs, it can mean quite a few different things. And then we think about personal hygiene. This might be a little bit more noticeable sometimes with men and with shaving, but also women who regularly get their hair done or have their hair put together, or maybe women who always wear makeup, they've stopped wearing makeup. Again, being on top of noticing those changes in daily grooming habits. And then if the senior is still driving, there's some things that driving's another lot of really important details to be aware of when driving and reactions. So obviously we would suggest that family caregivers go along a ride with the senior, make sure everything's okay, checking those response times, making sure not rolling through stop signs, for example, braking quickly to avoid a rear-end collision. Those are some things you can do, or even just checking the car over for dents or scratches could be a sign that maybe the driving skills have diminished a little bit and we need to look at some other options for transportation. And then concentration, I think, is always an important one. And when we think about that, we can think about, are they mishandling medication due to lack of concentration, or concentration not where it should be? And that's a good place to start if you're concerned about, concentration or memory loss or any of those things, is looking at pill bottles, really determining if their meds are getting taken regularly. Even family caregivers can call the pharmacy to check on whether refills have been ordered and at the right time, so to speak. And then, is the person missing appointments? Are they missing their favorite TV show? Or, again, just missing a birthday or anything like that, missing their favorite card game they go to once a week? These are signs of diminishing concentration and could be some memory loss or forgetfulness or confusion. So those are really big signs to look at for a family caregiver to really be aware of those. Another thing that I didn't really put on this slide to consider is thinking about poor judgment. This could be things like deciding not to go to the doctor or going back to the follow-up appointment because they were just there, or, even though it's a different doctor, for example. Really, I think this is when we talk about some of these concentration or memory loss, confusion type of signs, we should refer families to the warning signs of Alzheimer's disease, the 10 signs the Alzheimer's Association uses. They're a great set of 10 signs that we can drive families to really understand if there's any reason to be concerned about the memory loss. Okay, before we go into ways caregivers can take action, I want to look at the environmental clues on the next slide. So we make sure to cover those for the family caregiver as well. Now, I put some just general questions on the slide, but thinking about family caregivers, when they're over visiting, looking at the housekeeping, maintenance issues, those can be some pretty obvious signs that something isn't right or something's changed or something is diminishing within their loved one. So when we think about the refrigerator and the freezer and the drawers, is it spoiled? And then why is it spoiled? Was it pushed to the back and couldn't see it, or are they not eating enough? Or is it because they haven't gone to the grocery store in a while? There's just lots of different things to consider. Checking other areas, just general cleanliness and looking for messes and messiness. My grandmother was a very, very, very good housekeeper, and so we did find signs in the refrigerator. That was probably our first sign. But as she went along, things didn't get picked up as normal as they used to be. Gosh, that was probably the hardest thing that we had to cope with, because we would go help her clean, and she would say, well, aren't I a good enough housekeeper anymore? Oh, boy, that was a hard one to hear. But we just phrased it up as, you've been dusting your furniture for the last 80, 95 years, so why don't you let us take a load off here? So very hard one, but that was a sign. Looking at furniture and countertops, are dishes piling up? Is there dust and dirt around? What about floors and stairways? I think about seniors that might have some arthritis or shaky hands. Is the floor dirtier than normal, meaning they might have spilled something and didn't get it all wiped up, for example? This is a really good time to do some sort of a safety checklist and really look through some safety issues. There's lots of those available out there, and I can give some of those resources at the end as well. But looking for frayed carpets and throw rugs and, is there furniture in the way? Is there too much clutter? All of those things are environmental clues that something could be diminishing if for clutter, for example, if things aren't getting put away and picked up. The other thing is the mail is a good place to look for family caregivers to get some clues. Are bills being paid? Are correspondence being answered? That could be a sign of something different. Now, again, with my grandmother, she wrote letters all the time. When she got a letter, she answered it right away. And I remember the time when she stopped answering letters, and this was a sign that things were changing. There wasn't anything immediately that we had to do. We just knew this was a pretty big change. It was very different for her to get used to not writing the letter. But she would just pick up and call the person on the phone then, so it all worked out. But that was a sign to us, like, oh, she used to do that, and now she's not doing that. So just, again, another important thing to be aware of. Okay, so what can a family caregiver do to help their aging loved one? Let's start talking about some action steps on the next slide, because we've talked a lot about the clues. Let's look at the action now. Now, the first step is really to ensure the person's well-being is to share concerns. Now, talking openly and honestly is obviously the preferred way to go. We've got to consider that other people could be involved in this conversation, but it should really be with the caregiver and the person for sure. We also need to remind our family caregivers that this is a conversation, meaning both parties need a chance to talk openly. The tone and the approach of this conversation is going to be key. We don't want the person to feel attacked, so you don't want to have a list of things. Maybe you have a mental list of a couple things to bring up, but you don't want to go through, I saw this, you did that, this happened. And I know family caregivers aren't doing that on a regular basis, but I think sometimes when our aging loved one sort of fights back or says, no, I'm fine, we have another example ready to share, and that can kind of pile up after a while. So I think the tone, that's why I talk about the tone and the approach, bringing one thing up at a time and really discussing it and, letting that settle for a while, and then if there's another issue, bring that up at a later date. It really can help with the relationship. Also, I think another action step is to have the caregiver and the aging loved one schedule a medical checkup, especially if there's physical warning signs that we've talked about, like the weight loss or depression, even from an emotional warning sign. Now, that can be something that the aging loved one, can go on their own, or the family caregiver could go with. Sometimes this is a great solution when you have had those conversations and it didn't go well, and the senior isn't seeing what you're seeing, to get an impartial person to, to evaluate the situation as well can be helpful. And seniors sometimes can agree to that. But it's important that the caregiver either attend the session or at least be available, maybe not in the room, but on the outside to answer questions or ask questions, and then really stay on top of those follow-up visits and make sure that they're both parties are on the same page as far as the care and what's happening at home, because a lot of these things, again, are safety issues. So we need the family caregiver to stay involved there a little bit. And then regarding those safety issues, addressing those types, I think of it as a two-pronged approach. We have to first, make note of it to the senior. What is the issue? And then we have to address it. I think it's hard. Pointing out the issue is sometimes the hard part. I think when we come at it from a place of love and concern, though, it's not the, and, sometimes it'll be okay. But I go back to my grandma again with throw rugs. She loved to throw rugs. She wanted them all the time. They were a tripping hazard. It took till she was probably the last year in her house for us to remove the throw rugs. That's how long the battle went on. So it's a really hard thing, but it was a huge safety concern. I think about, though, when you think about plans to address them, we did try things. She thought the carpet looked dingy, so we had the carpets cleaned more regularly. We tried to do different things like that. So we tried to get the backing, so on and so forth. I won't bore you with the details, but some of the plans, even installing better lighting, the caregiver might install grab bars in the bathroom to prevent falls. If a caregiver sees that towel rack a little loose, it could, again, we saw that could be a sign, but then installing a grab bar is a great solution to that issue. Again, when we have these conversations, you know me, I've talked about communication on almost every single one of these webinars, and the conversation and how this goes makes or breaks the situation. So coming out of that love and concern, again, reminding the senior loved one, I just want you to stay at home. I want you to stay as independent as possible. I want you to still have this life. This is why I'm doing this. Can go a long way. When we talk about driving, if a senior loved one isn't able to drive anymore, or is having trouble taking care of some of the personal grooming, or maybe having trouble running the errands and getting to the store, or having trouble cooking, that's when a caregiver could be considered from a home care service or a home care company. And there's a lot of wonderful caregivers out there, professionally paid caregivers, that do everything from cleaning the house to preparing meals, running errands, reminding medications, all of those things, and assisting with bathing and dressing. It still gives the senior some control over the situation, just has an extra helper on board. And then another thing families can do is consider the community resources. There's lots of services out there. Our local grocery store, for example, has started delivering groceries. We've talked about Meals on Wheels a lot. There's a lot of different services out there that can help families navigate these changes and really help ensure that the person stays independent. We want the family to, obviously everybody's goal is to keep the person engaged and as active as possible. Now, of course, as we're taking action, our families we're challenging them to take some action here. We have to be prepared that they're going to get some pushback or their loved one dismisses the concerns. And so, again, I call you guys part-time therapists all the time. You're going to have to, again, not help lift that caregiver back up, tell them not to be discouraged. And it's important, I think, that we remind them that this takes many conversations. This isn't just a one, here's what I saw, and now go fix it. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 or 4 conversations, or for me, with my grandmother and the throw rugs, my God, I can't tell you how many conversations we had. So we can't get discouraged. We've got to keep our families staying patient and not pushing. And another solution is involving all of you or a doctor if necessary. Again, we talk about that impartial third party that can really shed some light. Again, another huge, and I love to end on this one when we're talking about taking action, is control. Our families have to keep thinking of ways to help the person feel more confident and feel more in control, or remind them of the control that they have. This means, when you think about control, the senior still has control over their life, and when they feel that, they feel so much better, and they will actually feel more confident. And when you think about confidence leads to executing plans successfully. So when a person has that personal control, we could argue they're in better health. And it's sort of that mind over matter kind of theme, or it really shows the importance of attitude. So families really need to kind of keep reminding or let the person have as much control as possible, because, again, that leads to the confidence, which can really go a long way in maintaining independence. So let's look at the next slide on how families can encourage their senior loved one to keep that control and that confidence and choice. Okay, this is all about dignity. We have to treat people as equals and ensuring that they remain in control of what happens. We have to let them be involved in the decisions that affects their care, including personal decisions. This goes back to what to wear for the day, what time to go to bed. Those are some of the things that we can still ensure that the person can still be involved in those decisions. And I think this is hard, and I've done this a million times, I'm sure, in my career. We can't assume that people aren't able to make decisions. It just never hurts to ask. So it's okay to ask their opinion and ask how they want things and ask them to make the decision. If they can't make the decision, then you're there to help back that up. Provide opportunities to participate in as many ways as possible is another really important point. Putting the person's needs first should be at the forefront. Sometimes caregivers, we schedule things on our time or when it's convenient for us, which I know that's necessary sometimes. But, families, if they're, full-time working and they can only do appointments on Saturday, is that really the best time for the person? Really paying attention to the senior, when is their best time of the day? If it is a Saturday, are they better in the morning or the afternoon, kind of a thing? So really helpful to really think about putting the senior's needs at the forefront. And then I think partnership is a big key here. We need to encourage families to think about the situation as they're a partner. And sometimes I think we should change the name from caregiver to care partner. This really is a partnership. Both sides need to feel involved. Both sides want success. Both sides have common goals. And it goes a long way when we think about this with a partnership of finding solutions along the way. And then one more point, I think, and it kind of goes back to providing opportunities to participate. We need to make sure families are doing with instead of doing for. A lot of times it's just easier for us to step in and do something, whether it's dusting the furniture or making a meal or whatever it is. If the senior can still do it, it may take longer, but it's something that we should allow them to continue to do for as long as possible. I know it might hinder our schedule, but we've got to make sure that they're doing everything that they still can possibly do. That gives them the sense of control. Okay, so we can encourage families to preserve the dignity by allowing that choice and control. Let's talk about the senior themselves, because a lot of you are working with seniors directly. So let's look at this on the next slide. We want to, of course, I know we probably say this a lot during the day, but helping the person be patient, take things slow, get the hang of it, and then really accepting the self. Recognize that, losing some independence or losing some of the abilities we used to have is a common thing, and it's ultimately we're all going to go through it, and it's just what happens. But again, reminding of the goals to maintain independence is the key. And it's okay that we tell seniors it's okay to be sad and frustrated at times. It's okay. And a lot of times saying things like, this must be hard for you, or, geez, I'm sorry this is happening for you, being there to support them goes a long way. We need to encourage our seniors to stay open, take time to process the concern from families, and understand that they're coming straight from the heart. Okay, now, before we go to resources, I do have to end on a positive note on this one. I want to challenge all of you to think about what it means to age successfully. As we've mentioned a couple times in this webinar, aging gets a bad rap, and people don't look forward to it, and we all know that attitude is half the battle. So let's look at the final slide and talk about ways that we can encourage seniors, to celebrate aging. And it's interesting that research has shown is that people who have a positive view of aging actually stay healthier longer. So we need to celebrate aging and the experience and bask in that self-confidence that comes with it. Celebrate the memories, celebrate the experiences. It's wonderful to look back and realize all the good the person has done. Also, adaptability is key here. The key to change is to embrace it, accept it. Accepting something that is different isn't right or wrong, it's just different, and we just have to be good at adapting. We always want to continue to learn and grow, practice curiosity, keep setting goals, and we all want to reconcile our failings. We all have made mistakes in our lives, and so have the seniors that we care for. They've all made mistakes. But it helps us learn, and so practicing accepting those feelings, seeing the good that came out of them will help us age better. And, remember, age is just a number. We're hardwired to define people by a number on their birth certificate, but I encourage you to look past that number and see what is on the inside. Okay, let's look at resources before we get to questions. So we have lots of different articles on caregiverstress.com. This is also a website that has a wonderful safety checklist that I mentioned earlier. Lots of good resources there. Also the Caregiving Network, a volunteer group, that might be a good resource for families to consider when or if they want to keep their senior loved one involved. We've talked about that on previous webinars about lots of different projects that can be done from home. And then the National Council on Aging. They've got great information there as well, all kinds of resources that families can learn more about, even learn more about helping people with losing independence. Lots of different resources for family caregivers there as well. So I want to thank you all for being on the webinar today, and thank you for your time. And I'm going to turn it on over to Steve now, and we will answer any additional questions you have.
All right. Thank you very much, Molly. Lots of great information, as always. Thank you. Okay, everyone, as you can see from the slide up on the screen here, it is time for the Q&A session of today's webinar. We also want to welcome Erin Albers from Homestead, who is joining us for the Q&A. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
All right. Just type in those questions, anything that's on your mind, anything you want to clarify or talk about with Molly. Okay, Molly, let's get to the questions right here. We were talking about driving a little bit earlier. Do you have any particular suggestions regarding the loss of driving, how to address this with someone individually?
I think this is it's a real hard one to address, and I get this question so often from families, and I think there's no easy answer, and it's kind of, when I've talked to families about it, it's really based on the individual circumstances. I think what I've seen families do that is successful when it comes to driving is, yes, there's some decline and probably shouldn't be driving anymore. I think that as they're approaching it, I go back to, you got to come with solutions. So if you're going to talk to the person about their driving's changed and things aren't going well and probably isn't safe anymore, then we have to come with some solutions to kind of soften that blow a little bit. So if it's one family did such a brilliant job. They talked to their father about, his driving wasn't very good, and what do we do? And so when they told him, we're really concerned about your driving, you probably shouldn't be driving anymore, it took years, or not, maybe a year, but it was a gradual change. So it was, why don't you not drive at night anymore? And then it was, why don't you not drive here anymore? So they just sort of gradually gave suggestions on lessening his driving, but in the meantime, they also provided solutions. So he really only drove 2 nights a week to go to his card club. So they just made arrangements with one of the other guys to pick him up on the way there. So as they were saying, you know what, it's probably not good for you to drive at night anymore, Bob's going to pick you up, or whatever the guy's name was. So that was a little bit easier to handle, because a lot of times that's just a pride thing. It's very hard to, well, and think about it, it's a huge independence thing. You're losing your ability to just come and go as you please. So it's a little bit of hard thing to admit. So when you've got a solution ready, it's hard to it's easier to admit, yeah, I don't want to drive at night anymore, rather than having to say that, say, oh, great, Bob's going to pick me up, so to speak. So I think the key is to have some solutions in place, have ways, families got to have a plan in place to keep the person active and social. So looking at the community resources ahead of time, finding activities or like a senior center that might pick them up during the day, or those kind of activities. So lots of churches will pick up seniors, so to speak. So there's just I guess my biggest advice is to come with some solutions when you're going to have that conversation. It tends to go a little bit easier. But again, this is probably one of the hardest things, and it's hard to have the conversation with aging loved ones about driving.
Okay, Molly, next question. Do you have any insight about technology that is able to assist with some of these barriers?
When we're talking about barriers, do we mean, how do you interpret that, Steve? Is it
some of the challenges that come along with aging? Do you have any insight about some of the technology developments that have happened?
Oh, yeah, there's, I don't know a lot about all of the technology because it seems to be exploding. I can't keep up with all of the different technology that's coming out. I think the obvious one I think a lot of people turn to is that personal response, emergency response system, or that little button you wear. I've seen that one. Obviously, I think that's a beneficial. It can help somebody stay at home longer because at least there's a little bit of protection there if somebody were to fall. As far as a lot of the other devices, like I've heard there's devices that can monitor movement in the home, monitor blood pressure, monitor all of those different things, heart rates. I feel like I don't know enough about those to comment. There is a lot of research being done on those right now. That I'm even aware of one study in my local community that is looking at that intervention. So I think the important thing is to really understand it's got to be easy for a senior to navigate it, and a family for that matter. And so I think to evaluate those things, I definitely think it's something to look into, but I guess I don't have enough knowledge about all of the different technologies to comment on anything super specific.
Okay, Molly, have you heard about meditation and mindfulness being used for older adults as they go through the many transitions that come with aging?
You know, I haven't heard of that, but I think that that's a brilliant suggestion and a really good idea. I think it's funny because now that you're saying that, it would be completely new. When we think about it for our generation or the generation behind us or even the boomers, they're pretty exposed to mindfulness and meditation. It's not a foreign idea, but to a senior in that generation, it's probably a completely new concept and idea. So I think that's great. I think it's a great suggestion, and I'm going to look into that a little bit more, and I bet if I can Google it, I bet there's lots of information out there about that. But we all know meditation's helpful, and mindfulness is very helpful in all of our daily lives. So, of course, why wouldn't it be helpful when we're aging as well and during the aging process? I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay, Molly, what about situations where adult children live out of town and are not seeing some of the changes that's going on? Who can be relied upon in situations like this?
You know, I think that's where they will have to rely on the friends and the neighbors and the people that the senior is normally or always interacting with. If they're going to church once a week, the congregation, you know, making a call to somebody over there, or if they go, get their hair done once a week, or their card game, or whatever it is, we've got to find that person, that source, to really give some insight. I do, speaking of technology, there are those cameras, though, as well, those nanny cams that we keep hearing so much about. That's another way to get eyes on the situation, although pretty invasive. But, my mother and I, we live 50 miles from my grandmother, and so that is exactly how we had to rely, when we couldn't get there every single day. That's why we would rely on her neighbors, her best friend that stopped over every morning, so on and so forth. So you've got to find that support system. Again, and another thing, if a family doesn't have those neighbors or friends or whoever to contact, that's, again, when having a caregiver, hiring a caregiver to come in even just once a week and making sure everything's okay, checking over things, so on and so forth, can be very helpful for a long-distance caregiver.
Okay, Molly, let's one last quick question here. I've done a placement recently due to a client having increased stages of Alzheimer's, but her husband, still being at home, is not coping very well. What suggestions do you have that can be shared with him to help him cope with his wife's placement?
Oh, boy. That's so hard. I think that, there's lots of different things to consider there. I don't know, is he able to come visit her on a regular basis? I think he has to determine and give himself a little bit of time and patience on the new normal now. So get into a different routine. And coping, is it an emotional loss or is it a physical loss where, or meaning she used to cook meals, or of course if she's in end stages, she probably didn't cook meals for a while. But it's like I would probably need a little bit more information, but I feel like between having some patience and getting used to a new routine, really understanding the pain point there. Like I said, is it emotional? Is it a physical thing? He doesn't like living alone. Is it really got to get to the root of what the issue is or why he's feeling so low? And maybe it's sad. It's hard. It's hard to see somebody decline. And if that's the case, we all know there's lots of different ways to take action. So, referring to a therapist, seeing a specialist, going to the doctor to get evaluated, there's lots of different ways to handle that. So I guess my message is I would really try to understand what the main pain point is and move from there.
Okay, Molly, well, we have just about reached the end of our hour here, and unfortunately we're out of time. But I want to thank you for another fantastic webinar. Thank you for being here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks all of you, and have a wonderful holiday season and many blessings in the new year.